If you use the wrong definitions of things, you invariably make the wrong arguments. Richard Dawkins doesn't know how to define God. What he does is contrast God with matter, and then make materialist arguments that invariably leave the concept of God looking foolish or extremely unlikely. Dawkins says that one of the greatest intellectual challenges is to explain how the complex, improbable design in the universe arises. He proposes that there are two competing explanations. One, there is a designer, a complex being, who creates complex things, hence the complexity we see. This is the God hypothesis. Two, there are simple things operating according to simple principles, which give rise to more complex things. This is the evolutionary hypothesis. Dawkins is a lazy thinker who can't be bothered to do anything more than line up God against evolution and see who wins, like Godzilla versus King Kong. Why doesn't Dawkins conceive of a God made of simple universal things, from which we get all complex things? Why doesn't Dawkins conceive that the design in the universe comes from the innate design features of what reality is made of? If the eternal and necessary building blocks of reality reflect design, and why wouldn't they? Then why would we not expect to see design everywhere, exactly as we do? Reality is made of eternal and necessary sinusoidal waves generated by the ultimate explanatory principle, the principle of sufficient reason, PSR. Anything that reflects the PSR is by definition rational, logical, and designed. It has innate mathematical design, given that the PSR is the unique, exclusive foundation of mathematics. You cannot have mathematics without it. If reality is intrinsically intelligent, as it would automatically be if it were entirely the resultant of the PSR, which exists ontologically as mathematics, the subject of supreme rationalism and rational explanation, then rational design would be mandatory. No one would be in any way surprised by discovering design everywhere. It would be inconceivable that this would not be the case. What is the simplest way to understand reality? The Occam razor's way. Reality is made of eternal and necessary things, designed things, mathematical things, which produce by combination temporal and contingent things, which are also designed mathematical things since they inherit that from their parent objects. Imagine a mind as one whole collection of eternal and necessary basis entities, sinusoids, ill thoughts in themselves. The mind can then use these basis components to create any temporal and contingent things it wants. It literally thinks them into existence, i.e., it uses basis thoughts to make compound thoughts, and these compound thoughts include the things of the world, exactly as happens in a dream when your mind thinks up the content of the dream. There are countless such minds, and the collection of all such minds is none other than God. God, in his eternal and necessary mode, is perfection. God in his derivative, temporal, and contingent mode is an evolving mathematical system, which wishes to evolve to perfection. Perfection is the simplest state, the most universal state, the most symmetric state. Imperfection is complex, particular, asymmetric. Mathematical reality, in its temporal, contingent mode, must eliminate all particularity to become perfect, meaning perfectly universal. You would never get Richard Dawkins addressing a God like this, would you? Dawkins doesn't like it when God is presented rationally, logically, mathematically, and not as some laughable, undefined, magical object of faith. Dawkins proposes that as a general principle, simpler explanations are preferable to complex ones, as per Occam's razor. Indeed they are. And what is the simplest Occam's razor explanation of reality? It's that reality is in fact made of explanation, i.e., it is made of the principle of sufficient reason, PSR, i.e., there is a reason, an explanation of why everything is as it is and not otherwise. Everything has an explanation because everything is made of the ontological explanatory substance, mathematics, which is what the PSR ontologically exists as. If you refuse to accept that reality is literally made of explanation, then you are denying that it has any explanation. You are claiming that it is magical and miraculous. It's not. Nothing can be. Immanuel Kant said that reality in itself is totally unknowable. That's nonsense. Reality in itself is the most knowable thing of all, the product of pure reason and logic, with no need to refer at all to empiricism. Reality in itself is pristine mathematics, as it must be for reality to have a simple, universal answer, the Occam's razor answer. Dawkins uses a comical argument to claim that God cannot be both omnipotent and omniscient. It goes like this. If God is omniscient, then God can't change his mind. If God can't change his mind, then there is something that God can't do. Hence, God isn't omnipotent. To see how silly this argument is, all you have to do is change his mind to commit an error. The argument then goes like this. If God is omniscient, then God can't commit an error. If God can't commit an error, then there is something that God can't do. Hence, God isn't omnipotent. But of course, the whole point of God is that he is perfect and cannot commit errors. And that's what his infallibility and omnipotence consist of. God can't be imperfect, can't be in error, can't do logical impossibilities. These do not limit or contradict his omnipotence. These are what constitute his omnipotence. He couldn't be omnipotent if he made mistakes, was imperfect, changed his mind, was erratic, inconsistent, was Richard Dawkins. Contrary to what Dawkins claims, God does not have to be extremely complex, but he certainly needs to be capable of generating any amount of complexity, just as human beings do all the time in their dreams. Is there any dream a human cannot have? A human can put anything in a dream. The human's creative possibilities are literally endless. Is that not godlike? Dawkins argues that the theory of a universe without a God is preferable to the theory of a universe with a God. It is emphatically not. A reality with a God, an eternal and necessary intelligence comprising a myriad of monadic minds, can create the universe. A reality without a God, devoid of an eternal and necessary intelligence, is no reality at all. Where does the universe come from if it has no eternal and necessary foundation, God? Where does existence come from if existence is not eternal and necessary? The worst possible explanation of reality is one where there is no such thing as eternal and necessary existence, and non-existence literally magics itself into existence via some magical, random, spontaneous event that contradicts the principle of sufficient reason in every way. Stephen Hawking, channeling Dawkins, said, "Spontaneous creation is the reason there is something rather than nothing, why the universe exists, why we exist." This is the worst explanation ever given in all of history as to why there is something rather than nothing. It is not an explanation, it is a non-explanation, an anti-explanation, a refusal to explain. It's an invocation of magic and an appeal to the most egregious miracle, one based on a category error. A theory without God is as bad as it gets. It is totally irrational and illogical. As soon as you grasp that any reference to God is in fact a reference to mathematics and the principle of sufficient reason, then any theory that is not predicated on God cannot work. It really is that simple. As soon as you equate God and mathematics, everything falls into place. God is absolutely not any ridiculous theistic invisible sky wizard. God is the opposite of that. Dawkins said, "The temptation to attribute the appearance of design to actual design itself is a false one, because the designer hypothesis immediately raises the larger problem of who designed the designer. It doesn't raise any such problem. The designer is mathematics, which is an innate design system. What designed mathematics, if we are to use such an expression, is the principle of sufficient reason, the essence of designed explanations. The PSR is an eternal and necessary designer. No one can design it. It is innate design. It is uncreated and uncaused. It is that which has always existed and cannot not exist. Non-existence is a strict impossibility because the PSR makes it so. Something rather than nothing exists because the PSR allows positive something to be exactly balanced by negative something, meaning that the resultant is nothing, and yet also something. The sinusoid is the signature basis example of something that is something and also nothing. It's not that there is something rather than nothing. It's that something exists by virtue of being mathematically nothing. Only mathematics can furnish this solution. Only mathematics can be the answer to everything. That is incontestable." Dawkins said, "The whole problem we started out with was the problem of explaining statistical improbability. It is obviously no solution to postulate something even more improbable. To state that existence can come from non-existence is not just statistically improbable, it is strictly impossible. It is a category error. It is logically forbidden, and forbidden things cannot happen. The PSR excludes them. Anyone who claims that existence is not eternal and necessary is more or less deranged. The universe, though, is definitely not eternal and necessary. It is a temporal and contingent creation of the underlying eternal and necessary ontological order. It is created, and then it is uncreated. A big crunch reverses the Big Bang. Mathematic symmetry demands this. You do not understand the universe except by understanding the eternal and necessary order that underpins it, and that order can entirely justifiably be called God. It can also be called mind, or base mathematics, ontological mathematics. Richard Dawkins claims that the alternative to the designer hypothesis is not chance, but natural selection. The designer hypothesis is in fact completely correct, but it must be understood that the designer is math, not some biblical invention. In A History of Western Philosophy, Bertrand Russell said, "Plato was mathematical, Aristotle was biological. This accounts for the differences in their religions." Dawkins' whole problem is that he is biological, hence Aristotelian. He needs to be mathematical, hence Platonist. Math is the answer to everything. Any other answer is impossible. The PSR and the PSR alone offers the rational and logical explanation of everything, and the PSR exists as ontological mathematics. The end.